Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Kerry Jr. II. Today on the show, how do we improve and strengthen our fragile democracy?
We'll ask what a truly majoritarian democracy might look like and whether reforms in Michigan could move us closer to it.
Then, former state representative Abraham Ayash reflects on the shifting political landscape among Arab American voters and what it reveals about identity and power.
Later, we'll get an update on Hmong refugee and Michigan community leader Liu Yang. He's been in ICE custody for a decades-old conviction that was expunged.
Advocates say immigration officials are actively trying to remove him from the country.
And in Hour 2, scholar Eve L. Ewing on how U.S. schools helped construct racial hierarchy. Plus, comedian George Wallace on family, forgiveness, and finding the joke in hard times.
The questions we ask today shape the country we live in tomorrow. This is the Metro.
We begin with the state of democracy. When it comes to our federal system, we often don't have a representative majoritarian democracy. What I mean by that is that the idea of one person, one vote often doesn't hold. Gerrymandering favors one party to be elected in the House of Representatives. The Electoral College overrides the popular vote. Money is considered speech, which means that people with more of it have more influence in our politics. So what would it look like to have a democracy that represents people more than it does geography? To have a politics that doesn't favor the rich over the poor. Osita Nwanevu is a writer at The New Republic and The Guardian, and the author of the book, The Right of the People. In it, he argues that if we had a majoritarian democracy, we would collectively be better off. Producer Sam Corey spoke to him about that and whether many ballot proposals initiated in Michigan would create a more representative democracy in our state.
There are three main ideas in your book: that democracy is good, that America is not a democracy, and that America should become a democracy through the transformation not only of our political institutions, but of our economy as well, a gradual transition, significant enough in scale that we might as well consider it a new founding. We'll get into what that new founding looks like, what you want it to look like, but we talk about democracy a lot in this country. What is it?
I think the simplest explanation I could give you is that democracy is a system in which the governed govern. The system in which those who are subject to governance are the ones themselves who are doing governance. It's not responsibility that's transferred over to some king, some higher authority, some class of elites. People themselves govern, or in Lincoln formulation, government of, by, and for the people. You can read a lot of dry and dusty books getting into things in a more complicated way, but that's the simplest rendering.
And as part of that, you write that democracy needs to be dynamic. That is, that it needs to be good at bringing about change or moving along with change. And to do that, democracy needs to do procedure well. It needs to offer us a stable, formal way to make collective decisions and resolve disputes. If you look right now at Lansing and Michigan or at Washington, D.C., it's clear that we don't do either of these things well. What went wrong here?
It holds from the time of children, really, that the instantiation, the model democracy held up as an example for the rest of the world. And look, I think that there are ways in which we should be proud of the progress we've made politically over the last 200 some years when it comes to expanding the right to vote and having direct election of senators and all of these kinds of things. But I think that there are fundamental aspects of our system that can't really be considered democratic at all. So I've done a lot of talks about this book now in Washington, D.C. So there's about 700,000 people with no full representation in Congress. They have a one non-voting delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who can't vote in the final passage of legislation. So if you go back to the definition we just tried, they are governed certainly by the federal government, but they don't have a really direct say in government. There are actually 4 million Americans for whom this is true, most of whom live in Puerto Rico. So right off the bat, that's the fundamental democratic challenge. The age of our system ought to be, if we are a democracy, just where all people are represented. That's just not true. for many, many Americans. Even those less than two-thirds representation, how the representation distributed quite unequal. So a voter in Wyoming, a state with fewer than 600,000 people, fewer people, in fact, in Washington, D.C., gets the same number of senators as a voter in California, a state about 40 million people. If for its own country, it'd be one of the 40 largest countries in the world, and this one's the largest Congress in the world. They get the same amount of representation in the Senate, which means functionally in that chamber, somebody in Wyoming has about 67 times representation of somebody in California. We're told in school that this is balanced out by the House of Representatives, but this is a real true and meaningful sense. This smaller, less populous states functionally, if not a structure, exercise a kind of veto power over legislation. It might even touch upon people's experiences of government closer to ground at the state and local level. But as far as the federal system is concerned, I think there are real fundamental problems that I don't think we talk enough about in our politics, which I think goes some way towards explaining why we're confused and dismayed and can't really understand why Washington doesn't seem to work right. I think there are structural reasons why that's the case.
We don't have majoritarian democracy, is what you're saying. We don't have a representative democracy. There are way too few representatives for populations that are too large, and also the inverse. Is that fair?
I think that's right. And again, there are aspects in the system that we're told are designed to provide a kind of more direct representation. So like a House of Representatives, for population apportioned house that's supposed to be the people's house. We're in the middle right now of this big gerrymandering conversation, right, where Democrats and Republicans are trying to hash out these districts to fight each other. We have a system in this country where you can basically choose your voters by drawing the maps every decade or so, which is insane from a democratic perspective. So yeah, there's so many places in our system where, we tell ourselves we have democratic principles at work. We tell ourselves we believe in democracy. There are people obviously who are telling themselves now that we have a democracy that is under threat. And I think the challenge that the book tries to make is to say, look, I don't think it's the case that we have a democracy that would protect you from these external threats. We have a system that is not really attacked at all.
It's a lie that we've been telling ourselves, and we've told again and again, that we have a democracy. We do, of course, have elections. We have some institutions dedicated to free speech and majority rule. Why is it that we don't have a majoritarian democracy? What has gotten in the way of that?
Well, I think it goes back to the actual founding of this country. We have these debates in politics where we might raise some of these issues that I just described. Generally, there was a democratic reform conversation under Joe Biden. And the response to that on the right was to say, well, actually, look, we're not a democracy because we're not supposed to be a democracy. We're founded as a republic. That's what the founders wanted. They feared democracy. A lot of people on the left, liberals, who say, actually, no, the founders really intended for us to have a majoritarian system, and we need to fix our institutions to fulfill that vision. I actually tend to think, even though I'm on the left myself, the Republicans have the better side of the argument. As a matter of history, the founders were very, very perturbed in the aftermath of the American Revolution about a lot of democratic action that was happening at the state level. You had a very impotent federal government under the Ellis Confederation that didn't really do much at all. But in the middle of this economic crisis that arose after the revolution, you had people at the state level that flew into the legislatures, passed debt relief measures to make it easier for them to pay their taxes and so on. The founders and a lot of wealthy Americans believed that this was going to undermine the stability of private property, the stability of contracts. And they came to this point, especially after Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, where they understood that they needed to create a different federal system, a federal system that was capable of acting directly upon the American people. They also, as we kind of discussed with the Senate, believed that there should be these different kind of barriers to direct democratic agency. It's where the Senate comes from. The Senate is talked about explicitly out of the convention as a house that's going to represent private property. So there are all these kinds of features, including, the executive branch, the presidency itself, the way it's constructed, that are designed to limit popular influence. Although we've done a lot to democratize the system, more people can vote now. We have at least nominally political equality across, the entire spectrum of Americans. You have direct election of senators and so on and so forth. Some of the basic components, the most important basic components of the constitutional order, as established in 1787 by founders who feared democracy, are still in place today. And they're still frustrated in our ability to make democratic policies in the ways that the founders, I think, intended.
And so you want us to have a popular majoritarian democracy, which at least a number of us want, maybe not everybody. And you call this a new founding. I know you were talking a little bit about Puerto Rico and D.C. These are not states. We could make them states. We could end gerrymandering in the House. We could make the Senate proportional in terms of representation. So there would be more senators if the state has a larger population. What is included in this new founding? How do we make our institutions actually democratic?
But I think there are different levels of reform. There are ideas that I propose that you could see happening in 5 to 10 years. But then there are also things that I think are going to take a long time. I think reforming the Senate fundamentally is probably going to take a new convention or some kind of new constitutional arrangement that I think is decades and decades away. I'm not one of these people who say that, if we had a constitutional convention tomorrow, you fix all these things and it'll all be great. No, I don't think we need to build a consensus around some of these ideas. I think we need to build a public consensus about what democracy is to begin with. And that's the conversation I hope this book helps to start. There are already so many reformers doing incredible work on the ground. I think many, many Americans, they have vague notions about democracy. They know it's good. They feel positively about it, but they certainly don't see the system the way that I see it. That's why I say that when I'm talking about a new founding, I'm not talking about a single moment. I'm talking about a movement probably akin to the civil rights movement or the women's movement, something that will take decades of effort, decades of debate and experimentation to really fulfill.
Democrats seem to be more genuinely interested in this vision and small d majoritarian democracy than Republicans do. I'm wondering why you think that is.
Well, I mean, I think the conservatives have always been kind of hostile to democracy. I'm going to say so. I think that there's something about abstract ideals, whether it's equality, personal freedom of speech and religion, or democracy, that the conservative movement, back to its origin, has always been kind of skeptical. I think conservatives have this view of society where there are fundamental, natural structures in place within society, natural hierarchy that we'd do well to preserve, that we'd do well to protect. I think that there's a kind of skepticism of rearranging society or changing society in such a way that we upend the dominant structures and hierarchies that have shaped it. You have people like Mike Lee saying a couple of years ago, very straightforwardly, democracy is not the objective. We want prosperity, we want peace, but democracy is actually not part of that. It's some other thing that we don't have any kind of intrinsic reason to respect or exalt. People in National Review right? Charlie Kirk said it, or he passed.
We are a constitutional republic with a democrat mechanism to put people in power.
So there's a natural, I think, ideological and philosophical difference there that accounts for partisan division we have on this issue.
I'm wondering why you think they're wrong and why you truly believe it in your bones. Democracy, as you know, is really hard and complicated and needs to change all the time. It's not as simple as a ruler saying something and other people doing it. And as you're noting, plenty of conservatives throughout history and today say that we should create the good life, liberty and prosperity, but we should do it by circumventing the whole democracy enterprise. Why are they wrong?
Well, the first part of the book offers you very, very practical reasons why I think democracy is just a better system of governance than the alternatives, which would be some form of monarchy, maybe some form of aristocracy. As you said, I think it's a more dynamic system of government. It's a system of government that allows for and, in fact, encourages change, allows for different points of evaluation where you can say, well, we tried this, let's try something else. You can replace the top leader in a way that you can't really in the monarchy or can't really in the dictatorship. So there are all kinds of practical reasons why I think democracy actually makes a lot of sense. There are also thinkers that I reference who talk about the idea of collective intelligence. Even if you don't buy it, I think the other half of this is frankly a kind of deep spiritual intuition. I think that most people now today believe that we should have some measure of control of the conditions that shape our lives. That we are not meant to sort of enter the world and have our entire existences shaped and dominated by people who happen to be wealthier than us already, more powerful than us already. We have some ability to control our own missions and our own personal lives, but also to shape the societies that we live in. In that kind of, frankly, metaphysical and spiritual sense, I do think that there's something compelling about the democratic ideal.
This is The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm speaking with Osita Nwanevu. He's the author of the new book, The Right of the People, Democracy and the Case for a New American Founding. We're discussing why we don't have a majoritarian democracy, why that matters, and what politicians and activists and everyday people can do to change that. Osita, a big reason I wanted to speak with you is because some Michiganders are trying to do a bunch of things to increase democracy and get money out of politics, particularly through ballot measures. There are ballot initiatives to tax rich people more, to pay for education, to ensure that big corporations in the state can't spend on state elections, and to enact ranked choice voting. You may not have studied all of these. I don't necessarily expect you to have, but what do you make of these reforms? Do they fit nicely into the sort of new founding that you want people to usher in?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that maybe the bulk of the new founding I'm talking about is people taking the opportunity at the state level and at the local level especially to try out democratic reforms that begin expanding our discourse around democracy in ways that maybe over time filter up into federal level change. But certainly, at the ground level, there are things that activists can do, organizations can do to democratize the institutions of government that they local that affect it quite directly. Ranked choice voting is something I talk about in the book. I think it's a fantastic idea. Money in politics, what else needs to be said? I think most people know we have a deeply corrupt political system where people who are wealthy, corporations, influence the policy process and influence elections in all kinds of ways. And we'd better start reining in if we want to preserve the idea, the hope that we might become a democracy someday. But in general, I think the ballot initiatives are a fantastic way to put issues on the agenda, to mobilize on your own within your community without having to depend necessarily upon, party infrastructure or big deal politicians.
You're making the case for democracy, but I'm wondering how much people care about it at all. And maybe that's part of your project, is getting people to care about it. In this political moment, of course, people voted for President Donald Trump, whose administration is detaining people who are here legally, which has been making itself richer with favors from specific Middle Eastern countries. It has been expanding inequality with the Big Beautiful Bill. I mean, people did vote for this, a majority of them. What do you make of all that?
I think that people felt in this last election they're being asked to make a choice. They felt they're being asked to make a choice between democracy, this abstraction, and the price of groceries, of the rent, all of their immediate material conditions. And they said, look, I think democracy is great. In fact, I don't necessarily like the things that Donald Trump says and does. I don't like January 6th, but I have immediate material needs that need to be met. And those things are more important in some way than the ideal of democracy, abstraction of democracy. But I don't think that trade-off is actually real. I think that if we talk as ambitiously as we should about democracy, we come to understand democracy as the means by which we might actually improve our material situation by, for instance, expanding labor rights at work, expanding labor unions, having democratic structures in corporations. That section of the book where I talk about economic democracy goes into detail explaining how if we actually inculcate democratic values in the economy, we'd have better pay, we'd have better working conditions, we'd have paid leave. I think that if we had democratic structures at work, we had better unions, these could be places where we practice some of the basic capacities of democracy. Learning how to come together and work together with people who are different from you. Learning how to communicate, learning how to compromise, learning how to articulate yourself. These are things that most Americans are given space and time to practice. And so I think it can be little wonder that our political discourse can often feel so unproductive. So of course, we're not giving ourselves training grounds, these kinds of basic capacities, but we could be.
There are theories, or some theorists, that believe that we're less equipped to deal with democracy and to do the work of democracy because of the internet and capitalism. Essentially, those things have created a world with a lot less friction. I want a product, I order it now, it comes to my door. I have an opinion, I tweet it out without really thinking about it very much. But democracy demands a lot of friction, a lot of argument, a lot of debate, a lot of persuasion. What are the things we need to be doing to work on this skill, to develop it more and to get better at it?
Well, I think it's a good question. I don't know that I actually see a lot of friction and tension in technology. We have a lot of arguments. We have a lot of actually very fractious disagreements as a consequence of this technology that we wouldn't have necessarily been having before. And I think that's actually democratic and good. Can we veer off into the extremes and into overzealotry and into bad things? Sure. We see that every day. But I actually think that the last 25 years of American life has seen a real democratization of public discourse, largely as a consequence of technology. We need to figure out how to manage and work through collectively. My actual perspective on this question of how central conflict is to democracy is that we don't have a political culture that respects that. I think we hear so much from our leaders that, everything would be better if we just, sat down together and realized we have more in common than what separates us. And actually, if we talk things out, we actually realize that we all fundamentally agree on the same basic things, and our divisions are illusory. I actually do think that we have very strong and serious disagreements in this country for legitimate reasons that wouldn't necessarily go away if we were more civil to each other. And I think that's a difficult thing for people to grapple with. Because then the question becomes, how do you prevent politics from spiraling out of control?
So what does this look like practically if someone were to run on this stuff? I mean, there was a time when Pete Buttigieg was running for president in 2020 that he was talking about making the institutions of our government more responsive to democracy. He later dropped a lot of that stuff in the campaign. You write at the end of your book, America is ours, not Jefferson's, not Washington's, not Hamilton's, not Madison's, ours. Our identity is ours to establish and define. Our purpose is ours to determine. How does someone run on a pro-democracy platform and make it popular? How do you make people feel like democracy truly could be theirs if we change structures and reforms? Because quite plainly, these things sound really boring to people. How do you make this stuff more exciting?
Well, I think that the Democratic reform conversation we had, during the 2020 primary and the early years of the Biden administration was very dry. And it's all kind of this legalistic language that seems detached from, the things that really excite people about politics. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is, one, to make that material connection. You're not just talking about democracy because it's something your civic teacher told you was important in high school or something. You're talking about democracy because it will actually bring home more resources, more money, more rights for you. That's one thing I think we have to make clear. But also, again, the second thing I'd say the book is trying to do is have a vision of democracy that is not just about the defense of institutions people see as broken. It's a vision of democracy that says, yes, the institutions are broken. Yes, Washington doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Yes, the politicians are corrupt, and we have kind of betrayed the promise of democracy. And therefore, we have to have a kind of revolutionary movement, to found a different kind of society we can all be a part of. It's something that's forward-looking and not just about the defense of the way things have been. It's saying the way things have been, how things have been right, and that we can move forward in a fundamentally different way. That's a different register, I think, than most of the people who've been engaged in the democratic reform conversation have tried to utilize.
You can't run on preserving institutions as they are. You can't run on preserving the past. You actually, in order to win, you need to run on making reforms, on making change, on offering something new.
Precisely.
I'm wondering what you think it would mean for democracy broadly if Michigan or any one state was much more democratic than others. Earlier in the conversation, I was talking about all the ballot initiatives that are happening in Michigan. People are trying to get signatures for these to get money out of politics, to have ranked choice voting, what have you. What would be the consequences for creating a new founding, as you're seeking, across the country if states were to become more democratic?
Yeah, I think that you could have a situation in which states adopt some of these reforms at the state and local level, and they, expand access to the vote, make it easier to vote, have a kind of full slate of specific reforms to democratize a particular state or part of the country, and that becomes a model for other states, and that builds up to a conversation about federal reform over time. But I think the important thing is, building a constituency for democracy as such, which I don't think we really have. We have nerdy, wonky people, but on-the-ground activism about democratic reform that connects people on a material level. It's something we don't really see very much of. And so if you were to do this in Michigan, and you were to talk too, especially about economic democracy in the ways I've described, that is a kind of North Star for the parts of the country.
Osita Nwanevu is a writer at The New Republic and The Guardian. He's also a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute. He recently wrote the book, The Right of the People, Democracy and the Case for a New American Founding. He spoke with producer Sam Corey. Up next, Zohran Mamdani has made waves in Democratic politics after winning the New York mayoral primary. We'll hear from a former Michigan politician who supported Mamdani and believes his politics can work in our state. That's next on The Metro. Stay with us.